Back in 2017, Russia's top general stood in front of cameras and said something that, at the time, sounded like plain fact. He said Russia had built a self-sufficient military grouping in Crimea, strong enough to guarantee total control over the Black Sea. He even gave that control a nickname. He called it a Russian lake. Now watch what happens to that lake over the next 4 years. The fleet leaves Sevastopol, the city it had called home for more than 200 years. It moves to Novorossiysk, believing it will be safer there. It isn't. The ships move again. And then the map keeps going north, all the way to a naval base outside St. Petersburg, a place Russia never imagined Ukraine could threaten. On July 4th, 2026, the exact city Russian Marines were supposed to storm in the opening days of this invasion, and said 4 words that took 4 years and a navy that barely resembles a navy anymore to actually earn. Russia has lost the Black Sea. That sentence sounds simple. It isn't. A fleet doesn't just lose a sea in one afternoon. It runs out of it, slowly, port by port, hiding place by hiding place, until there is genuinely nowhere left to put the ships. So where exactly did Russia's navy try to hide? And why, one by one, did every single hiding place eventually fail? The answer is going to surprise you completely. Before you can understand what happened on July 4th, you need to understand why Odessa specifically is where it happened, because the location was not chosen by accident. Back in March and April of 2022, a Russian naval force, including large landing ships, maneuvered directly toward this coastline, and American officials warned publicly at the time that an amphibious assault could come within days. That single threat pinned more than 20,000 Ukrainian defenders to this stretch of coast for weeks. Nobody knew when Russian Marines might actually come ashore. The sinking of the flagship Moskva that April ended the immediate danger, but the fear that Odessa could still fall from the sea never fully went away for the people living there. Zelenskyy himself framed the entire 4-year campaign with a single reference point. He said it started with the liberation of a tiny, almost forgettable rock called Snake Island, back in the earliest weeks of the war, when a handful of Ukrainian defenders famously refused to surrender to a Russian warship. Everything that followed, every strike, every retreat, every scoreboard, traces back to that one small island. And in the same Odessa visit, standing beside the scoreboard, Zelenskyy signed a decree announcing something Ukraine hasn't needed in years: a brand new naval academy, to be built right there in Odessa, training the next generation of officers for a navy that 4 years ago barely had anything left to train them on. On July 4th, 2026, that exact fear is what Ukraine's president walked into and dismantled, piece by piece, using nothing but numbers. Inside a coordination meeting with the country's naval command, footage was released showing a scoreboard, a full official breakdown of Russia's entire Black Sea fleet, category by category. Of 33 main combat ships, 4 destroyed, 8 damaged. Of 34 landing ships, 15 destroyed, 10 damaged. Of 23 support vessels, 3 destroyed, 9 damaged. Add all of that together, and you get 22 ships completely destroyed, 27 more damaged, out of 90 total vessels. Now here comes the number that should genuinely stop you in your tracks: the landing ships. The exact category of vessel that threatened to put Russian Marines on this very beach in 2022. That category has suffered nearly 74% attrition. 15 destroyed and 10 damaged out of 34 total. The specific tool Russia built to invade Odessa is 3/4 gone. Ukraine's president delivered his verdict standing inside the wreckage of that exact threat. He said, "Everyone can now see that we have seized the initiative from Russia and are bringing this war back to where it came from, onto Russian soil, into Russian skies, and to Russia's shores." But here's the part of that footage that almost nobody was actually looking for. Sitting quietly in the background of the same meeting, defense analysts spotted something Ukraine had never officially confirmed operating: a truck-mounted launcher with distinctive rounded missile canisters matching the design of Norway's naval strike missile. This wasn't unveiled at a press conference with cameras and prepared statements. It was caught almost by accident, sitting in the corner of footage from what was supposed to be a routine staff meeting. Ukraine had been quietly running a 4th advanced anti-ship missile system this entire time, alongside the American-made Harpoon, the Swedish RBS-15, and its own homegrown Neptune, the exact missile that sank the Moskva. 4 different countries, 4 completely different guidance systems, all confirmed operating at once on the very coastline Russia once threatened to invade by sea. That leaves Russian naval planners with a genuinely impossible defensive problem. It isn't one missile system they need to defeat anymore. It's 4, built by 4 different countries, using 4 different ways to find a target. And until this footage leaked, they didn't even know one of them existed. So here's where this story genuinely gets interesting. because a scoreboard like that would already be enough to alarm anyone in Moscow. That NSM missile isn't just another launcher sitting on a truck. Its terminal guidance uses an infrared imaging seeker, meaning that in the final seconds before impact, it can look at a ship's heat signature and match it against a library of known vessel types, all without ever switching on a radar signal that Russia's ships could detect and warn against. It finds its target by sight, in a manner of speaking, not by broadcasting anything Russia can listen for. And nobody has even confirmed how Ukraine got it. Analysts noticed the camouflage pattern on the launcher doesn't match the version used by Poland, the only other country in Europe known to operate this exact coastal system. Which means somewhere along the way, a fourth country quietly armed Ukraine with a weapon capable of hunting Russian ships by heat alone and didn't tell anyone. But the ships that survived didn't just sit still and accept their fate, they ran. Away from Sevastopol, away from the coastline where all of this had just been laid out in a scoreboard, towards somewhere they hoped would finally be safe. But if the ships that got away already knew Sevastopol wasn't safe anymore, where exactly could they possibly go that would be any different? Because the place they chose next should have solved the problem completely. It didn't. Not even close. By 2024, Russia had already made the call. Sevastopol, the fleet's home for over 2 centuries, had simply become too dangerous to keep the ships there. So the vessels that survived pulled out and relocated east, to Novorossiysk, further from Ukrainian-held territory, tucked behind protective seawalls, supposedly out of range and out of danger. The protective seawalls of Novorossiysk were becoming a cage. Within months of the relocation, ships sitting in that harbor were already facing threat levels close to what had driven them out of Sevastopol in the first place. The pattern repeats almost like clockwork. The frigate Admiral Essen, one of the fleet's remaining cruise missile carriers, was struck inside Novorossiysk harbor in March 2026, struck again in April, struck a third time in May. Each hit burned away a little more of what that ship could still do. And in December 2025, something happened that had never happened before in this entire war. An underwater drone, not a surface drone skimming across the water, an actual underwater one, reached a Kilo-class submarine sitting quietly at anchor in that same harbor and left a 9-meter crater in the pier right beside it. That was the first confirmed case anywhere in this war of an uncrewed vehicle successfully attacking a submarine while it was sitting safely in port. Not at sea, in port. Supposedly the safest place a submarine can be. Russia's response tells you almost everything you need to know about how limited its options had actually become. Subscribe to the channel if you like our analysis. By early June 2026, 3 of the 4 Kilo-class submarines stationed at Novorossiysk had metal cage structures welded directly over their conning towers, a crude physical barrier meant to stop a drone before it can strike the most vulnerable part of the hull. British defense intelligence assessed this bluntly, almost certainly a preventive measure, because Russia genuinely has no better answer available. It's worth naming exactly what this is, because the comparison isn't flattering to a military that once called itself a naval superpower. Welding improvised cages onto vehicles to survive drone strikes is precisely what tank crews on both sides of this war started doing back in 2022, bolting scrap metal onto turrets and calling them cope cages out of dark humor as much as necessity. That same desperate logic has now reached submarines. A fleet that Russia's own general once bragged could guarantee supremacy over an entire sea is now relying on the same improvised fix as a rusted infantry pickup truck. And here's the detail that should genuinely worry Russian naval planners more than anything else in this story. Novorossiysk isn't just under threat right now. It's Russia's last real option that actually exists. Sochi and the Georgian port of Ochimchir are both far too small to host a major fleet. Retreating through the Volga-Don Canal into the Caspian Sea is technically possible, but by most serious assessments, it's effectively a one-way trip. Once a warship makes that journey, it doesn't come back to fight in this war. Russia's navy isn't choosing where to go anymore. It's simply running out of places on the map that still qualify as an option. Here's what has actually been doing this damage, and once you understand it, you'll understand exactly why welding cages onto submarines was never going to solve the underlying problem. Ukraine's naval drones started out as something close to raw desperation. Simple, unmanned boats packed with explosives, first used against the Kerch Bridge back in 2022, when Ukraine had almost nothing else to fight back with at sea. By late 2025, those same crude weapons had evolved into something closer to a floating weapons platform than a suicide boat. The current generation can travel 1,500 kilometers on a single mission, carry 2,000 kilograms of payload, and, hidden inside that payload, sit several smaller FPV drones, tucked into side compartments that open mid-mission like a hatch. Those smaller drones are guided by a physical cable running back to the operator rather than a radio signal, which means Russia's electronic warfare systems, its one remaining reliable weapon against drones, simply cannot touch them. There's no signal to catch, just a wire, trailing quietly through the water. The officer who first pitched this entire idea to Ukraine's security service put it simply when the newest version was unveiled. He said Ukraine had become the first country in the world to pioneer this kind of naval warfare, and that they had no intention of stopping there. Alongside that system sits a smaller, more exportable cousin, a drone that shot down a Russian helicopter using an air-to-air missile called the R-73, the exact kind of missile designed to be fired from one fighter jet at another, now firing from an unmanned hull floating on the water. 5 months later, that same drone family used an American-made Sidewinder missile to shoot down 2 Russian Su-30 fighter jets in a single engagement. A boat with nobody standing on it, using weapons built for the cockpit of a jet, shooting down the jets themselves. In April 2026, American Special Forces used that exact drone family during live fire exercises less than 100 miles from Taiwan. A country that had to scuttle its only real warship in the opening week of this invasion has, 4 years later, built something that special operators on the completely opposite side of the planet are now testing against an entirely different rival. That detail is worth sitting with for a moment because it reframes the entire failure Russia has been living through. Russia's navy was designed and calibrated to fight NATO frigates, carrier-launched jets, and submarine-fired torpedoes. Every close-in weapons system, every layer of electronic warfare, every single air defense protocol built into those ships was engineered against large, fast, expensive targets. None of it was ever tested against a fiberglass boat costing less than a used car, moving at 80 kilometers an hour, with no crew inside to intimidate, negotiate with, or capture. And the fleet is now being consumed by exactly this shift, from the inside out. Partisan intelligence embedded inside a Black Sea Fleet electronic warfare unit reported that Russian naval personnel, sailors trained for years to operate conventional warships, are now being pulled out and transferred directly into the newly formed drone warfare branch. The institution is being dissolved into the very force that defeated it. Sailors who once crewed the ships now sitting damaged in Novorossiysk are being retrained to fly the kind of weapon that put them there. Cheap drones beating an expensive, historic navy inside its own home waters is one story on its own. But this same fleet had a second sea it was supposed to protect too, one that isn't even safe to fly over anymore. And the day before Zelenskyy stood up and said Russia had lost the Black Sea, something else happened quietly in Crimea. Something that suggests Russian officials on the ground already knew exactly what verdict was coming before the rest of the world ever heard it. But there's a second sea in this story, one this series has already covered as a supply corridor. A shallow stretch of water Russia depended on to move fuel and ammunition toward Crimea. What's new right now is something far more unsettling. It isn't even safe airspace anymore. On July 4th, the exact same day Zelenskyy stood up in Odessa and declared Russia had lost the Black Sea, Ukraine's general staff confirmed something else entirely, happening at almost the same hour. Ukrainian forces struck a Russian helicopter flying over the Sea of Azov. The specific aircraft type hasn't been officially confirmed, though pro-Russian channels quickly reported it as a Ka-52 attack helicopter. But this wasn't some freak accident, some once-in-a-war coincidence. Back in March, a different Russian helicopter had already been destroyed while sitting parked on an offshore drilling platform in that exact same sea, hit by a small FPV drone that had been carried and launched from an unmanned surface boat. A drone launching a smaller drone to take down an aircraft that never once expected to be treated as a target. So ask yourself something simple here. If a helicopter isn't even safe sitting still on a fixed platform, and it isn't safe flying low over open water either, where exactly is Russian rotary aviation supposed to operate at all? Because the pattern that emptied this sea of Russian ships a year ago is now repeating itself in the sky directly above it, almost beat for beat. And here's where the timing gets genuinely uncomfortable for Moscow, because it suggests something bigger than one lucky drone shot. According to partisan reporting, Russian officials stationed in occupied Crimea were quietly ordered to begin evacuating official documents from the peninsula starting July 3rd. This happened a full day before Zelenskyy's public announcement, and they weren't moving military equipment or fuel first, they were moving paperwork. That's usually the kind of step an administration takes when it's no longer fully confident it will be able to keep control of the territory those documents belong to. A helicopter shot down over water Russia was supposed to fully control. Official documents quietly leaving Crimea a full day before the world heard the verdict spoken out loud. Neither of those two things made international headlines entirely on their own, but put them side by side, and they read exactly like an institution already bracing for an outcome it privately expects, well before its own president has said a single word about it publicly. And if Russia already knew the water was gone and the air above Crimea wasn't safe either, You'd assume everything further away was still solid ground. It wasn't. Not even close. What happened the same night as Zelensky's declaration, more than 1,000 kilometers away from any of this, is the detail that turns this whole story from a regional defeat into something with far bigger consequences. On the night of July 4th, while Ukraine was still celebrating its Navy Day declaration, Ukrainian drones struck a Russian naval base at Kronstadt, near St. Petersburg, more than 1,100 kilometers from Ukrainian territory. And this wasn't even the first time it had happened. A month earlier, on June 3rd, drones had already reached that exact same base and set fire to a Russian corvette sitting inside a dry dock for repairs. That corvette, called the Boyki, cost an estimated $400 million to build. The drone that destroyed it cost roughly $55,000. No anti-drone netting had been installed anywhere over that dry dock. No anti-aircraft fire was even recorded during the entire attack. Russia's most distant fleet, the one location in this entire war nobody genuinely expected drones to ever reach, was caught completely, embarrassingly unprepared. The timing made it worse. That strike landed on the exact same morning Russia was opening its annual International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg, the kind of event built to showcase strength and investment to the rest of the world. One Ukrainian defense advisor summed up the moment with a line that spread quickly online. He said, "The forum was opening, with a nice plume of black smoke in the background." And it wasn't an isolated embarrassment either. For the second year running, Russia quietly canceled its own Navy Day parade in St. Petersburg entirely, citing what officials called persistent security concerns following successful drone strikes deep inside Russian territory. A country canceling the parade meant to celebrate its own navy because it's afraid its own navy might get hit while celebrating. A month later, drones came back to that same base, and this time hit a nearby oil terminal at the same moment, one of Russia's primary export hubs on the entire Baltic coast. Confirmed by satellite imagery, confirmed by Ukraine's own general staff, describing the target as sitting more than 850 kilometers from Ukraine's actual border. Here's the single fact that should completely reframe everything you've just watched unfold. Ukraine has now struck Russia's Black Sea fleet at its historic home in Sevastopol. It struck that exact fleet again after it retreated to Novorossiysk, hoping for safety. It struck submarines sitting underwater in port, supposedly the safest place a submarine can ever be. And now, on top of all of that, it has struck an entirely separate fleet altogether, Russia's Baltic fleet, at a base sitting more than 1,000 kilometers from the nearest Ukrainian soldier on the ground. There is no longer a single body of water anywhere near Russia's coastline where its navy is demonstrably, provably safe. Because if distance itself can't protect a fleet anymore, what exactly can? That's not a small tactical question buried inside one war. That's the question every admiral on every coastline on Earth is quietly asking themselves right now. Okay, for a second, let's go back to that quote from 2017 one more time. Russia's top general stood in front of cameras and called the Black Sea a self-sufficient grouping, strong enough to guarantee supremacy. He gave it that nickname, a Russian lake. By 2024, Britain's own defense ministry had already quietly downgraded that claim in public, describing the Black Sea fleet as functionally inactive. That assessment hasn't improved since. If anything, everything you've just watched confirms it went further than almost anyone expected. A Ukrainian naval spokesman recently described the fleet's actual current behavior in the plainest words available. Russia's remaining cruise missile launches now happen roughly once a month, fired directly from port, because the fleet is no longer willing to risk putting to sea, even to fire its own weapons. Hear that sentence again, because it might be the quietest and most damning line in this entire story. A navy that no longer sails to launch its own missiles isn't really a navy anymore. It's a fixed launcher, hiding inside a harbor, hoping nobody notices it's still there. The failure here goes deeper than one fleet losing a few dozen ships. For as long as navies have existed, warships were protected by one simple assumption. A vessel is worth defending precisely because it's too valuable to lose, guarded by layers of armor and weapons calibrated against other large, expensive things trying to sink it. That entire assumption depended on the threat always being big, slow, and costly too. Nobody built Russia's Black Sea fleet, or its Baltic fleet, to survive a $55,000 boat with nobody standing aboard it. And that lesson isn't staying contained inside this one war. The same drone family that shot down Russian jets and helicopters here has already been tested by American special forces near Taiwan, a completely different coastline, against a completely different rival. A country that had to scuttle its only real warship in the opening week of this invasion has, 4 years later, effectively written the operating manual every major navy on Earth is now being forced to study. It's only fair to be honest about what hasn't happened here too. Russia's fleet hasn't been wiped out in one decisive battle, and no Western intelligence agency has formally declared it completely combat ineffective in absolute terms. What's happened instead is slower, and in some ways far more permanent. A fleet that cannot safely leave port. A fleet that cannot rebuild because wartime restrictions block new warships from even entering the Black Sea in the first place. And a fleet quietly transferring its own trained sailors into the exact branch of the military that just spent 4 years defeating it. Russia spent 240 years building a navy specifically to prove it could rule the water around it. Right now, that navy is welding cages onto its own submarines. It's firing missiles from its own parking lot once a month. And its own officials are quietly moving paperwork out of Crimea a full day before anyone said the actual words out loud. So here's the question worth carrying away from all of this. If a country with no navy at the start of this war can force a 200-year-old fleet into hiding across 4 separate seas, what does that mean for every other navy on the planet still trusting the same old rulebook? Because somewhere out there, another admiral is looking at his own ships right now, wondering if the water he thinks is protecting him is actually the exact same trap Russia just walked into. Russia didn't lose one sea. It ran out of every sea it had. And the country that did it started this war without a single ship to its name. This is the Frontline show. And before you go, if you want to see how Ukraine's defense intelligence destroyed a Russian MiG-29 in Crimea, click the video on your screen for the full breakdown.